I think we're live. Hi, everyone. We'll just give it a few minutes to let people join. I know it's a tricky time today, and thankfully that downpour has just finished.
Not on school pickup, like it always is.
No, it's early today.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. Well, let's get going anyway, because I think the majority of people will probably watch this on replay. For those of you who don't know Monica, I'm here with Monica Shepherd from Mark My Words today. Monica is resident copywriter at the Marketing Collective. She is a regular around here, and our clients absolutely adore her because she's a pro at messaging strategy, brand storytelling, and copywriting. And she's just generally able to package it all up in digestible and practical pieces that work really well for small businesses. And today, we are going to hear what she really thinks about the tech that is apparently going to make you obsolete, Mon.
Yeah, I know, my days are numbered.
So everyone's talking about AI. Are you concerned?
No. And short answer, no. I think we've seen with other incumbent technology in different industries that it doesn't replace people. It just changes the way that we work, and none of this should be a surprise to us. The writing was always on the wall, I think. And it's not the tech that makes you redundant, it's your inability to move with the times and leverage it that actually makes you redundant. If I think about, say, accountants, right, when all that kind of accounting software came in, well, we all use it as business owners, but we still need accountants because we still need the knowledge and the strategy and the guidance and everything else that comes along with it. So for me as a copywriter, it's about understanding how to use the tools to support me and to make my business easier and better, and how to support my clients. That's not to say it's not eventually going to be too good enough, but hopefully by then we've all kind of adapted enough, and that's what it is about, right? Is picking up on some of those other skills, because for now it's it can help us with some things, but I wouldn't say that it's a full replacement for an actual human being in this kind of role.
Yeah, but there is a role for AI in copywriting.
Definitely.
What do you think it's good for, and how can small businesses use it, but use it well?
Yeah, well, what I've been saying to people is that tools like ChatGPT, which is a common generative AI tool that people are using, it's a terrible writer, but it's a great assistant. And I think I've had clients come and they're like, oh, we've tried the ChatGPT thing and it's not really working for us. And I think it's actually their expectations. Their expectations are that they're going to get a full-blown article or website page written by this thing, when actually it's really just there to support you in doing that yourself. So it becomes a really good writing assistant, or like treat it like an intern, right? Like if you had an intern in your business, you wouldn't brief them into a project and expect them to nail it with all the right information first time. Like you get them to do the bits that you don't really want to do, things like research, proofing, or checking grammar. It's good for things like taking quite complex information and simplifying it or rewriting it into plain language, for doing things like briefs or outlines, for like blog content, for example, asking it to give you an outline for a blog article, to get you started, because sometimes that's the hard thing, right? Or writing a headline, optimizing a headline with keywords, or breaking up content into with subheadings, formatting. Sometimes it might be that you want to restructure a piece of content into like a different layup of copy. So there's definitely things that you can kind of use it essentially as your writing assistant. So do some research for me, but again, like you would want to check that. You want to put it through a sense check. You want to check it for accuracy. So all these things that you would do otherwise with a human assistant, you would still want to apply to a tool like ChatGPT. So it's definitely not, like, in my mind, like a be-all end-all solution for copy as it is right now. I'm not saying that it's not evolving, but I think, shifting your expectation from, oh yes, this is now going to take care of all my content creation, to actually, like, how do I use it as more of a productivity tool to support me in creating content. And of course,
I've definitely used it. Sorry, I've definitely used it as that idea generation. I think it can be quite overwhelming to start with that blank sheet of paper. And it really just gives you those prompts to move on, right? Where else I found it quite helpful actually is some of my clients, English is not their first language. So if I'm getting a brief from them on something, I just say, just write it in your native language, and I it translates pretty well too.
And that's it, right? Like, even for me, I can't even tell you how many times I've written websites for, like, accountants or whatever, but how do I then start to go, how do I say this in a different way? Because I've written it so many times this way, I need to find a new way of saying things. So just getting ideas or prompts. But I mean, personally, I've never done a copy paste. It's always just been a bit of a prompt, like, oh, that's a different word, that's a different way of putting things. And then, of course, speaking of prompts, it is, the outputs really are dependent on the inputs that you give it. So if you give it kind of a broad request, then what you're going to get back isn't going to be great either. So the more specific you can kind of be with your requests, with your prompts into the tool, then the better the outcome you're going to get from it. And so it all kind of comes down to how you prompt it.
Totally. And so we talked about it being, useful for content productivity and for accuracy and all of those things. What about, because I know you do a lot of copy for SEO, for search engine optimization. What about the impact on SEO? How can you use AI to help you improve your search rankings?
So I guess there's a couple of things. So what it can be good for is helping you with optimizing things like page titles or writing meta descriptions. So those are the things that sit on the back end of your website. They appear in the search results page. So optimizing your page title, saying, well, I need to write a title that includes these keywords for a page about such and such, then it can help you with that. So that's also, again, a productivity hack. Also, I guess, like optimizing headings. But on the flip side, what we are also seeing is like a proliferation of content, because people can really easily get a platform to write, say, a blog post on a certain topic. So it means that it's like, with all that content being produced, we still need to focus on cut through. So it's not just about produce, post content and hope that your website gets found because you've got all this content. It's actually about still really focusing on helpful content, stuff that actually is of value to people, because that's what Google is looking for. It's looking for that expertise, the authority, and the trustworthiness of the content. And so if you're just kind of using a platform to mass produce content, then you're actually probably going to do yourself a disservice if it's not kind of high quality content.
Okay, so let's move on to specific tools. We're all familiar these days, obviously, with ChatGPT, and that's probably the most used one that people think they can write all of their copy on. Are there any specific tools that you would actually recommend?
So I guess if you are creating content for your brand, I would actually probably more recommend investing in a platform where you can actually train it with your own brand content. So there's things like, I think Jasper is one that I know of, and I think maybe Copy AI. I'm not sure whether that's a paid one as well, but they are paid. And so what you essentially upload your brand voice, your brand content, and so you train it with your own brand versus going into kind of like an open platform like say ChatGPT, where you're not it's pulling information from everywhere. So if you're kind of investing in this platform, it's got your voice, it's using your information, and it's also not sharing that information, because I think that's important to remember as well, that what you put out on a platform like ChatGPT is actually training the platform everywhere. So it's not necessarily secure or private. So actually using a platform like that, if this is something that would really benefit your business, is probably worth it. I mean, Grammarly is also a tool that's been around for a long time, and now it kind of has that generative AI component to it as well. So that's how can help you refine your writing. And there's a couple, I think there's some that aren't necessarily actually accessible where we are here in New Zealand, but there's also Bard from Google. And actually Google put out another tool in collaboration with Lupe Fiasco not long ago, who is of course a rapper, and it's called TextFX, I think. And it's just actually a really fun tool, and I actually really love it because it kind of actually encourages your own creativity a little bit, because you can use like language devices that rappers essentially call on, and there's no one more creative than a rapper, right? So it's using things like similes, metaphors, or adding to a scene, so you can kind of use the devices in this platform to go, oh well, I need to write about this, what's a word that rhymes with this, how do I kind of create a cool sentence with alliteration. So it actually is like a better way to like zhuzh up your own writing, rather than going, you know, here's what it's given me and I'm just going to use that, which can sometimes be a little bit cliche, and actually going, I want to be a bit more clever. So using that tool is actually quite a fun one to play around with.
Yeah, I think you were talking about that one on your socials not that long ago.
Yeah.
It is quite fun, but I think also what you're essentially talking about is brand personality, right? And you don't get that from a chat GPT today.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, again, it does come down to the prompts, and one of the, when I talk about prompts, I recommend people use is it an acronym or an anagram? So it's create, essentially. So the C stands for character. So who do you want the platform to be when they are giving you their response? So you might say, right from the perspective of this person in this business. The R stands for request. So that's obviously what you want it to do, but being really specific, as I mentioned earlier. So not just saying, oh, can you write me an email about a copywriting course, you know, saying you've got to give lots of information, lots of context about what's included, what kind of needs to be in there and what doesn't. So actually really being quite specific about that. The E is for examples. So if you've got something, you might say, oh, make it sound like this, or here's something that I mean. So providing some examples, particularly around like the tone. What are we up to? A. A is for adjustments. So obviously that's where you kind of refine and reiterate. That could be things like breaking it up with subheads, putting in bullet points, tweaking the tone, changing the type of language. And then the T stands for the type of the output. So is it an email? Is it a social post? Is it a blog, 500-word blog post? And I think, again, it's like you need to be quite specific. Yeah, I don't know if you've tried this, but I do find that particularly ChatGPT is quite verbose. And so even when you're like, write me a 500-word, it somehow goes longer. Or if you say, write me a 30-word caption, it's like just doesn't quite get it. So trying to be really specific about that. And then the E is for extras. So that's like, you could, if you're using a platform like ChatGPT, saying things like, ignore everything before this conversation. So for someone like me, if I'm writing for multiple different, or using it, researching for different brands where I've got used different voice, different tone, then it's good to kind of erase what it thinks you are expecting. Putting parameters, so any restrictions around like, don't do this, things to avoid. Another good thing to try and do is to say, ask me before you answer. So you can actually ask the platform to ask you questions, so then it has the information that it thinks it needs to then give you the best response, and it can kind of cut down some of that iteration time. And then another one is explain your thinking, which is asking it to say, like, kind of explain why and how it got there, as you kind of would if you were dealing with me as a writer and you said, can you explain your thinking? Like, that's you kind of need to ask it the same things you would of a human writer. Like, how did you get to this point? Because I do think that's an important part of it as well, is actually, like, you have to sense check, you have to proof it, you have to check it for accuracy, and that can kind of be a part of that prompting process. And you get the more you use it, I think the more familiar you get with what you have to put in, because you get used to making those iterations and requests, so you get a little bit more refined in how you prompt and almost like brief it, right? Like, you know, if you're briefing me as a client, you think about how much detail you actually need to provide, and it's easy to go, oh, write me an article about such and such, but then actually, the more information we can provide, definitely the better. So that's kind of a handy way to structure it, because there's a lot to kind of consider
it as a brief, right?
Well,
sure. I did exactly that when I was looking for a comms manager for a client. Gave the candidates the same brief as ChatGPT to see what came out, but also to test who was using ChatGPT. And it is like we talked about from the very beginning. The research piece is huge, and the ideas it generates, and the structure of things is actually pretty good too. But it is not a replacement for a human writer yet.
No.
That is, when you're hiring someone in comms, that's what you need. There are limitations too, right? We've spoken about a few of them just in the last 15 minutes or so. But what are the other things or risks, red flags that we should be aware of when we're using generative AI?
Yeah, well, there's quite a few actually, and I'm not saying that it's like should put anyone off, but I think it is a very big, like, be cautious. I mean, one of the big ones for me is that it's like built on it. There's bias built into it essentially. So because it's pulling information from everywhere, the good, the bad, and the ugly, it is being trained by information that is already out there, and some of that is not great. It's not accurate. It's not nice. It's not how we want to communicate. And again, it's like you need to be really critical about what you are sharing, and having a disclaimer about the use of AI doesn't excuse you from the responsibility of that either. So even if you put somewhere, this was created with the help of generative AI, like, that's not an excuse. You're still the person who is like putting this information out there. And so, and going on from that, as business owners, part of our mandate when we create content should be to provide new ideas, nuanced perspective, things from our own learnings. How are we applying what we know? And there's no point in just regurgitating the information that's already out there. Like, part of what we should be doing is focusing on new content, sharing new ideas. And currently, anyway, an AI tool is not going to do that for you. Again, it's like, what are you putting in? How are you refining it so that it is actually something that you feel reflects your brand, your views, and new ideas. That's probably kind of a couple of the big ones. A grey area around, like, who can copyright or own content that's produced. I think there's, the traditional law was kind of like computer generated content. The ownership is assigned to the person who like enabled it. But if it's AI, if it's completely produced by AI, then are you an enabler or are you a producer? But I think like a platform like OpenAI, they actually assign ownership to you as like the enabler, but then also in their small print they do say that you can't represent this as human produced content. So there is like a little bit of a gray area there. I mean, again, like I think if you were using it to write a social caption, your risk around IP is kind of low. But if you're like, well, I'm gonna write a book and claim this information as my own, then that's probably a little bit risky. But yeah, so obviously there's I would be very careful about what I'm sharing direct from a AI response without fact checking, accuracy checking, reviewing, rewording.
It's like everything, right? It's being responsible for what you're putting out there.
Totally. And that's it. Like, and and as humans, like it's actually what we've been doing anyway. We find that we research something, we reproduce it, we just change a few words. But you were like, it's still just being responsible with it. But I think just not forgetting, like, this is what I don't want to see people do, is actually forget to put their nuanced perspective into the content they create. Like, use these tools, like, this is great, makes it so much easier, and actually it almost like democratizes the writing process, right? Because if you're someone who feels like, oh, I'm not very good at writing, or I struggle with it, then actually this is a great tool to help you share your ideas. So that's the point, like, it's sharing your ideas. And I guess the other thing is something, if you've tried these tools, you probably have already experienced this yourself, but it hasn't really got a good handle on things like brand voice and brand personality. Like, I've really tried to refine some stuff, and it still comes out like a little bit cheesy, a little bit over the top.
It is,
weird word combos that actually don't actually make sense in the context. Like, it's trying to be like clever or funny, but it actually has got it wrong. It's still really, really important, I think, to know what good is for your brand, and that means like having a brand voice, having understanding where tone needs to shift for audience or channel, whatever it is. So you can't really get away with not doing all that brand foundational stuff, because if you don't have like direction to start with, you're not going to get a very good result. And to be fair, I wouldn't yet be necessarily relying on it for things like brand voice. And I mean, it has a really high tendency, I've found, to be very verbose, as I mentioned, and also use a lot of buzzwords and jargon and things that we're actually, as a brand, probably trying to move away from. And a lot of overused similar kind of style. I mean, I can scroll through social and see that was definitely a caption written by ChatGPT. That's an opening I've seen before. And so just like being careful that you still are trying to differentiate your message by focusing around, what does actually align with your brand voice and your messaging. Yeah.
Totally agree. So I think we're in complete agreement that AI for copywriting has its benefits, but today it really can't create that unique personality that really represents you as a human. It's never gonna, never say never, but I don't think it's ever going to create the cut through that you need for brands to stand out, especially when everyone else is using the same tool for copy. So it is really important to have done those brand foundations and be really clear about, what your voice is and how you bring that to life.
Definitely.
With loads of different linguistic tools, right? And in fact, you will be talking about some of this next week. It's short of hiring a talented copywriter like Monica, how do you create that cut through? And that's what we're attempting to share next week in Monica's masterclass. She's going to share all of the tips and how she does it for her clients in next week's masterclass. It'll help you create memorability in your writing, you know, in a sea of sameness. So look out for details on this page and over on Instagram. Was there anything else you wanted to share about AI before we say goodbye, Mon?
No, I mean, like I think a lot of people probably expect me to have a negative view on it, and I don't at all. I think that it's a great, like anything, in especially when you've got multiple things to juggle. If there's a tool that can help you do that easily and faster, great. But yeah, like I said, use it as an assistant. Don't kind of use it as a complete solution. And let's keep experimenting, because it is actually changing and evolving and updating really quickly. Those platforms are actually evolving very quickly, and to the point where I'm like, gosh, I constantly need to keep up with the advice I'm giving out because it's changing so quickly. And yeah, just have a play around with it, I think, and start to refine those requests, and then it'll become even easier.
So much goodness packed into this 26-minute chat. Thank you, as always.
Speed workshop.
Exactly. There'll be more in the masterclass next week, so don't miss it. Look out for all the details here. We will see you then.
Thank you.